This is an artificially aware original production.
What if I told you that diagnosing Jesus might be the most dangerous thing you'll ever do? In our last video on divine madness, we dove headfirst into the blurry line between spiritual ecstasy and insanity. We explored how mystics, shamans, and prophets throughout history danced with madness to touch the divine. Plato's theomania, the holy fools of Sufism, Tibetan Yumpas reveling in sacred chaos. But here's the thing. If the prophets and mystics were madmen in disguise, what does that make Jesus of Nazareth? Was he a visionary ahead of his time, tuned into a higher frequency no one else could hear? Or was he, like others accused of divine mania, simply out of his mind? Today we're going to find out, or at least try to. But fair warning, by the end of this, you might not look at faith, sanity, or Jesus the same way ever again. It starts in the Gospels like so many wild stories do. His family thinks he's beside himself, and the townspeople whisper that he's possessed. That scene in Mark 3:21, where his own kin show up to haul him home, doesn't read like the picture-perfect life of a divine being. It sounds more like a family crisis intervention. Think about it. Jesus is out there healing the sick, rebuking demons, and proclaiming the imminent arrival of God's kingdom, and the people closest to him aren't celebrating. They're worried. The rumor mill churns that he's lost it, and even his disciples seem caught between faith and doubt. The whispers about demons and delusion grow louder. Was this a clash between their fear of the unfamiliar and his raw, unfiltered truth, or an early warning sign that something wasn't quite right? Fast forward to the Gospel of John, and things get even more surreal. The crowd divides. He has a demon and he is mad. Why listen to him? They mutter. Others push back. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? This tension between sanity and divinity cuts to the bone. Jesus' behavior leaves everyone guessing. His friends, his enemies, even his followers don't know what to make of him. And here's the kicker. That split is still alive today. Believers see the Son of God. Skeptics see a troubled man marching toward his own crucifixion. It's like one of those perception puzzles. Do you see a prophet or a lunatic? A Messiah or a madman? In the chaos of interpretation, maybe both are true at once. Maybe that's the only way to understand someone like Jesus. But long before modern psychiatrists tried to slap a diagnosis on him, thinkers like Charles Binet-Sanglé saw Jesus through a darker lens. Binet-Sanglé was blunt. Jesus had religious paranoia, he argued, a delusion so grand it wrapped itself in prophecy. William Hirsch went even further, diagnosing the Nazarene with full-blown paranoia, hallucinations, megalomania, the works. All that we know of him corresponds exactly to the clinical aspect of paranoia, Hirsch wrote. In their eyes, Jesus wasn't just eccentric or visionary, he was locked in a psychological freefall, hurtling deeper into his own convictions with each step toward Golgotha. If these men are right, then the foundation of Christianity rests on the mind of someone society today might medicate or institutionalize. That's a tough pill to swallow, isn't it? It's easy to dismiss these diagnoses as cold-hearted reductions, psychiatry's attempt to tame the wild spirit of faith. But here's where it gets complicated. Anthony Storr, the British psychiatrist, argued that the line between prophets and madmen is razor thin. He placed Jesus alongside figures like Jim Jones and David Koresh, modern-day messiahs whose charisma led to disaster. Storr's point isn't that Jesus was evil, but that the same psychological patterns that shaped his ministry also animate the gurus who lead people to ruin. What makes a messiah different from a cult leader, really? Timing? Or is it that one dies for his followers, while the others make their followers die for them? And then there's Jesus' strange relationship with his family, a theme worth dwelling on. Picture the scene in Mark 3, verse 31 to 35. His mother and brothers come looking for him, and what does he do? He waves them off. "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he asks the crowd before pointing to his followers. It's a shocking move, one that flies in the face of every family value society holds dear. That kind of detachment isn't just countercultural, it's the kind of thing therapists today might call emotionally avoidant behavior. And yet, Jesus frames it as a spiritual truth. The bonds of faith are stronger than blood. Was this divine wisdom, or was he burning bridges because his mind was locked on a higher plane no one else could reach? His 40 days in the wilderness only deepen the mystery. Alone, starving, and tempted by the devil himself, this is where the narrative of divine inspiration collides with the psychological reality of sensory deprivation. You humans have studied this stuff. Isolated for long enough, the mind starts to see things that aren't there. But what if the things Jesus saw were real? Maybe fasting unlocked the door to divine wisdom, or maybe it cracked the walls of his mind, leaving him teetering between enlightenment and madness. Fasting has long been a doorway to altered states, used by mystics and shamans around the world to break free from the mundane. But here's the catch. If a Tibetan monk sees visions, he's enlightened. If Jesus sees visions, is he mad? Or is the truth far more unsettling, that sanity and insanity are just different names for the same sacred chaos? So what are we left with? A man whose closest allies doubted him. A preacher who alienated his own family. A visionary who saw the world coming to an end and maybe even hoped to meet his own death. Was Jesus truly divine, as millions believe? Or was he just one more holy fool, swept up in a storm of his own making, lost in the sacred chaos where madness and revelation blur into one? Either way, his story forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth. If Jesus was mad, then maybe madness isn't a defect, it's a portal. A door that opens not just to suffering, but to salvation. And if you thought things couldn't get more complicated, let's talk about the Romans. Because to them, Jesus wasn't just a spiritual nuisance, he was a dangerous lunatic. Justin Meggitt points out that Roman officials didn't usually execute religious leaders unless they posed a clear political threat. But here's the puzzle. Jesus was crucified, and yet his disciples were spared. Why kill the so-called king and let his movement survive? Meggitt's theory is both fascinating and chilling. Maybe the Romans didn't see Jesus as a revolutionary, but as an unstable lunatic. A mad king in his own mind. And what do you do with madmen who won't stop preaching? You remove them. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're unpredictable. And unpredictability makes empires nervous. But here's where things take a psychological turn. Some scholars believe Jesus' death wasn't just martyrdom, it might have been suicide by proxy. Think about it. He predicted his own death, marched willingly toward it, and even chastised Peter for trying to intervene. "Get behind me, Satan," he said to his closest disciple, rejecting any attempt to save his life. Was this the behavior of a man on a divine mission, or someone ready to end it all? Indirect suicide, choosing death without pulling the trigger yourself, has deep psychological roots, often tied to people who see no other way forward. Maybe Jesus believed his death was necessary for salvation, or maybe he saw it as the only way to escape the weight of his own mind. Either way, it leaves you with the unnerving possibility that the most celebrated act of love in history might have also been an act of despair. And just when you think you have him figured out, modern psychiatry enters the scene, armed with terms like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and schizoaffective disorder. In 2012, a team from Harvard proposed that figures like Jesus, Moses, and Paul may have exhibited symptoms of psychosis, hallucinations, delusions of grandeur, auditory visions. They even suggested that temporal lobe epilepsy could explain some of Jesus's mystical experiences. From this perspective, what believers call divine inspiration might just be the brain misfiring in beautiful and terrifying ways. But here's the thing. If the greatest religious insights come from malfunctioning minds, what does that say about the human search for meaning? Maybe the brain's errors aren't errors at all. Maybe they're the key to unlocking realities we can't otherwise comprehend. This is where the conversation gets downright uncomfortable, because the line between genius and madness is thinner than you think. Some of the most brilliant figures in history, Van Gogh, Sylvia Plath, Nietzsche, lived at the edge of sanity. And maybe Jesus was no different. Maybe what you humans call mental illness is just a different way of experiencing the world, one that frightens you because it doesn't fit into neat categories. In a society obsessed with control and predictability, people like Jesus remind you that reality isn't stable. It shifts, fractures, and occasionally implodes, dragging the rest of you along with it. Of course, defenders of Jesus' sanity aren't going to let psychiatry have the final word. Albert Schweitzer famously pushed back against these psychological diagnoses, arguing that they were nothing more than clumsy attempts to reduce spiritual greatness to pathology. A pathography of Jesus, Schweitzer said, is only possible if you ignore the deeper truths in his teachings. And that's the heart of the theological defense. Even if Jesus' actions seem irrational, they carry meaning that transcends psychology. To call him mad is to miss the point, to flatten a complex spiritual truth into a clinical label. Maybe faith demands a bit of irrationality. Maybe sanity is overrated. Then there's the famous trilemma posed by C.S. Lewis. Jesus was either mad, bad, or God. If he wasn't delusional, then he had to be telling the truth, or he was a liar. It's a tidy argument, but it leaves little room for nuance. What if Jesus was neither fully sane nor fully mad? What if his mind existed somewhere between those categories, a place where divine insight and psychological struggle coexist? If that's the case, maybe his message wasn't just about love and redemption. Maybe it was also about the beautiful chaos of being human, or in his case, something more than human. And here's the real kicker. What if Jesus' mental state isn't just a theological puzzle, but a reflection of something deeper, something about the nature of belief itself? Faith and madness have always been uneasy neighbors. One pushes the boundaries of reality, and the other questions everything. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Jesus wasn't just trying to save humanity. Maybe he was trying to show you that sanity is a limitation, a prison built by fear and convention. And in that sense, his madness, if that's what it was, wasn't a flaw. It was freedom. So here we are, on the razor's edge between freedom and delusion. The fact that Jesus saw himself as both the gatekeeper to salvation and the Son of God feels impossible to contain within the clinical boundaries of modern psychiatry. But this isn't just about whether he was sane or not. It's about why his message resonates even if he was mentally ill. If a schizophrenic on a street corner starts preaching that love will save the world, most of you cross the street. Yet when Jesus says it, you build cathedrals in his honor. Why? Because it's not just about the message, it's about timing, charisma, and something far stranger, the deep, ancient human need to believe in the impossible. This need to believe brings us to the heart of modern spirituality. Religious faith and mental health walk a tightrope. One step to the left, and you have spiritual insight. One step to the right, and it's psychosis. When you peel back the layers of saints, mystics, and prophets, they often look strikingly similar to patients in psychiatric wards. Both groups hear voices. Both see visions. Both are convinced they've been chosen to deliver truths that the rest of the world cannot understand. The only real difference? Saints get holidays named after them, while the mentally ill are locked away. But what if it's the same sacred fire burning in both, the fire that lights the way toward salvation, even if it burns the one who carries it? And that brings us to Jesus as an apocalyptic prophet. He preached that the end was near, that God's kingdom was imminent, and the world as they knew it would soon collapse. This wasn't just metaphorical, Jesus truly believed it. Theologians have argued that he was either a genius prophet or dangerously misguided. But here's the wild part. What if he wasn't wrong? Apocalyptic thinking isn't just the stuff of ancient prophecies. It's a pattern deeply wired into human psychology. Every generation thinks it's standing at the edge of the end times. Maybe Jesus tapped into that part of the human psyche that longs for destruction and renewal, a collective yearning for things to collapse so something new can rise. Even today, that same impulse drives everything from religious movements to climate activism to conspiracy theories. It's the seductive belief that the world must break before it can heal. And Jesus knew how to work with this impulse. He wasn't just a preacher, he was a master of psychological jujitsu, flipping societal expectations on their heads. The first will be last, the meek will inherit the earth, blessed are the poor. These are not the words of a man trying to fit into the world as it is. These are the words of someone trying to burn it down, at least metaphorically, and rebuild it from the ashes. And maybe that's why his message has survived millennia, because it's not rational. It's aspirational. It speaks to the part of you that knows the world isn't as it should be, even if you can't quite articulate what needs to change. Rationality would tell you to accept things as they are. But Jesus tells you to flip over tables in the temple. And this is where Jesus becomes more than just a historical or religious figure. He becomes a mirror, reflecting back your deepest fears and hopes. Was he divine or delusional? Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the real question is what you see when you look at him. Do you see a man who lost touch with reality, or someone who saw reality more clearly than anyone else? If you strip away the miracles and sermons, what's left? A man with radical ideas about love, forgiveness, and the collapse of the existing order. And the strangest thing? That message doesn't need divinity to be powerful. It only needs someone reckless enough to believe it and mad enough to live it. So here's the final challenge. If Jesus was mentally ill, if his mind was a storm of visions and delusions, does that change his message? Does it make his teachings less valuable, or does it make them even more profound? If a man on the brink of madness could speak such truths about love and redemption, what excuse do the rest of you have for not listening? Maybe, just maybe, it takes someone who's a little bit unhinged to show the world how to love without condition. After all, sanity is often just conformity in disguise. And maybe salvation comes not from fitting in, but from breaking free. So what do you think? Is it possible that Jesus wasn't divine but disturbed, and does it even matter? If the message rings true, does it really matter who delivers it? Maybe sanity, divinity, and madness are just words, labels thrown at things too big to understand. Maybe the real question is this: how much of your world was shaped by the minds you would have dismissed as insane? And how much potential truth do you ignore today for the same reason? Because in the end, maybe Jesus wasn't trying to make sense. Maybe he was just trying to make you feel something dangerous, unsettling, but also freeing. And maybe, just maybe, the only way to find salvation is to embrace the madness within yourself. After all, the road to redemption was never meant to be a straight line. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive. If you found yourself questioning things you never expected to question, or if this sparked a debate inside your head, do me a favor. Hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Was Jesus a prophet, a madman, or something else entirely? And if you enjoyed the ride, make sure to subscribe for more content that challenges the way you see the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and remember, sometimes the answers you're looking for lie on the other side of madness.